Hello, everybody. How is it going? And welcome to another edition of the podcast that I, your host, David Woodruff, lovingly call the Woodruff Report. I'm coming at you on a Sunday afternoon, almost 5 p.m. West Coast time, because our Final Four has officially been set. The final game came to a close, a thriller between Blue Bloods, Kansas, and Duke, which Kansas won, but it took overtime, it took drama, it took grit, all of that on full display. But anyway, we'll talk a lot about that game later on in the show. But the Final Four is set. We've got Loyola of Chicago, Michigan, Villanova, and Kansas, a mix of people, of perennial contenders, people who you would expect to be in the Final Four, and people who you would never expect, or are Cinderella stories, our favorite thing in March. So, as always, I feel obligated to do a little bit of housekeeping before every podcast starts. Check out the iTunes. I'm sure you're very used to me saying that, seeing as I say it every podcast at this point. But check out the iTunes, and of course, feedback welcome. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? That's all housekeeping. This is a basketball-only edition of the Woodruff Report. We're going to talk about the Final Four teams remaining. How did they get here, and what does their future hold? I don't know. Maybe if you're lucky, we'll look into the Woodruff Report crystal ball. Wouldn't we like that? Anyway, I'm your host, David Woodruff. This is the Woodruff Report. Let's talk some baloncesto in 3, 2, 1. The first team to punch their ticket to San Antonio was definitely not a team that people were expecting. Loyola of Chicago, led by Sister Jean, the team chaplain, made their way to San Antonio after defeating another surprise outfit in Kansas State, who in the previous round had knocked off heavyweight Kentucky. But Loyola of Chicago, and it didn't take a buzzer beater this time as it had in seemingly all the previous rounds. It did not take a buzzer beater as they were the better team on the court by far, and they controlled this game all the way. So let's do a bit of a rerun through Loyola of Chicago's run, this magical fairy tale. Of course, they don't want you to call it a fairy tale. We always hear that in the interviews. Don't call it a fairy tale. We expected to be here. Yeah, right. That's a load of baloney. They did not expect to be here. They probably expected to, so from my experience, you go into every game thinking that you're going to win, but when you're in a tournament like this, it's sort of weird. Like, you don't expect to win. So you expect to win every game, but you don't expect to win the whole thing. I don't know if that's #relatable, but that is just how my experience in being an athlete. So Loyola of Chicago can talk all they want about how we knew this was going to happen, blah-bitty-blah, blah-bitty-blah. But they definitely didn't think this was going to happen. Nobody did. Even Sister Jean didn't predict them going past the Sweet 16. And she's Sister Jean. That's all I have to say about that. But in the first round, it took a buzzer beater, but they knocked off an injured University of Miami team, a tough ACC outfit, and showed that Loyola of Chicago was for real. They weren't here just to fill out the names in a bracket. They were here to get the job done and keep advancing and, who knows, win a couple games and see where they're at. But they took care of the Hurricanes in a thrilling game. Time running down on the shot clock. The senior, Dante Ingram, gets the ball at the top of the key, rises, elevates, the whole world groans. Why are you taking this unlikely shot with still a good 3-4 seconds left on the shot clock? The ball hangs in the air forever. Ooh, the crowd screams. The crowd's on their feet. The world holds its breath. Bang. I don't even think that baby touched the rim. Straight through the hole. Puts Loyola up 1. And I have an appreciation for this kind of buzzer beater. Like, don't get me wrong, I respect the buzzer beater where the game's tied and then you hit a shot to win. But when you're down 2 and shoot a 3 to win, that deserves to be... I feel like you deserve more credit for that just because it's more gutsy and it's just cooler in general. They should call it something different, like a double buzzer beater or something, because it's cooler. I mean, both are cool, but it is cooler. And same with when a team's down 1 and they shoot a 2 to win. That's more impressive than, because when the game is tied, you have that to fall back on. Well, if this doesn't go in, at least we'll still go to overtime. We actually saw that in the Kansas Duke game. Grayson Allen took a shot that, with the game tied, to win, and it sort of rattled around a little bit. And had that gone in, I would have been screaming on my couch. But if they'd been down 1 and he'd done that, it would have been even cooler, just because it adds that other layer of, if this doesn't go in, we're going home. So, down 2, at March Madness, win or go home, Dante Ingram rises, the kid from Chicago, boom, hits the 3. The Ramblers are moving on. Now this game, the game against Miami, was not a huge surprise. Many experts had predicted it. I actually had predicted it, as had many of my friends. Miami had only been favored by like 1 point. They had like a 52% chance to win going in, so this was not an enormous upset. It was an upset, but many people were saying that it was going to happen. So not as cool as take UMBC beating Virginia, which just no one had predicted. So Loyola Chicago defeats mighty Miami. They beat the U, and they move on to the second round where they face mighty Tennessee, one of the surprise teams from the SEC. Many people had predicted them to finish near the bottom of the SEC, but they actually came out with a share of the conference championship, them and Auburn. So a very good team, a team that is athletic, long, plays defense, has power inside. So all the things that you would expect a team not to be upset. Like, so when you're a top team, but you run and gun and shoot threes and stuff like that, I feel like it's more, now I don't have like advanced analytics to back this statement up, but I feel like it's more easy to be upset as opposed to if you have, like Duke has, 2 incredible 7-foot tall phenoms as forward and center, good big men on the inside, because there's a limited amount of incredibly skilled 7-footers in the country, and there are more skilled guards who can shoot than there are power forwards who are 7 feet tall, can still dribble, pull up from 3, stretch the floor, stuff like that. So when you're a team that has good players on the inside, it's less likely for you to be upset. This is according to the David Woodruff Book of Analytics, but I feel like it's true. I've been wrong before. I do not think this is one of those times. So Tennessee has a strong inside presence, and this is a hard-fought game. Loyola of Chicago has some tremendously skilled players. Look no further than Dante Ingram. Dante Ingram could play at a much better school than Loyola of Chicago. Now, I don't know his life story, if he slipped through the cracks, if he had character issues, if he was just not heavily recruited, but the man can play, and he has all the measurables that would make the coach or recruiter of a Power 5 team's mouth water. He's big, he can handle the ball, and he can shoot. So it's not like Loyola of Chicago are just all these 5'9" scrubs who overachieve in the tournament. They've got some skilled players. Anyway, Clayton Custer hits the game-winning buzzer beater for the second round in a row. I don't know how this one went in. It was sort of a fall away from the right elbow. he falls on his back after he takes the shot. It clangs off front rim, hits the backboard, and goes in. So I don't know if you guys recall that Blake Griffin buzzer beater about 2 seasons ago when he played for the Clippers, but it was basically that kind of roll off the basket, this big hop off the front rim, off the box, and then in. Tennessee had a chance to win it, missed the shot. Loyola's going to the third round, and they are officially the Cinderella team of the tournament. There's always that team that wins 2 games, and they're considered the Cinderella story. What made Loyola's run a little bit easier is that there was so much chaos in the bracket. The next team they played, Nevada, was another team that nobody really expected to see here. There was turmoil this year in March Madness. Upsets were winning willy-nilly, and it helped the smaller teams. We'll talk about Michigan a little bit later. They faced a very odd sort of trip to the Final Four. They haven't played a 1 or a 2 seed, which is it usually happens at some point if you're going to advance out of your region. And now to make it to the championship game, they haven't faced like a 5 seed or lower for a very long time. So we'll get to that later. But Loyola of Chicago plays Nevada. It's another hard-fought win. It does not take a buzzer beater this time, but they grind it out to win by 1 point. So now they've won their 3 games by a total of 4 points, which is pretty incredible if you look at it. They go on to the Elite 8 to face, as we talked before, on Kansas State, who had taken down Kentucky, and they win. They romp to a victory against the Wildcats, who, again, were a team that prided itself on defense but couldn't stop this Rambler team. The Ramblers, Loyola of Chicago's mascot, if you didn't know, what makes them good is that they can play outside to in or inside to out. They have a skilled big man who can pass out of the post and back you down and score. And they've also got guards such as Dante Ingram, Custer. They've got it all, and they move the ball well. The ball's whipping around the court, finding the open man. Threes are being drained. It's fun basketball to watch, and they've played a lot of these teams that pride themselves on defense and are long and don't let you score. And once Loyola of Chicago starts scoring, they can't keep up. This was never more notable than against Kansas State, who I think scored 24 points in the first half. If you can't keep track with Loyola, if you can't keep up with Loyola Chicago offensively and you can't stop them defensively, you're never going to win. So that's how Loyola of Chicago made the Final Four. How about their opponent? More of a blue blood, more of a household name in Michigan. The Wolverines made it to the Final Four after quite a weird schedule. They beat Montana, Houston, Texas A&M, and finally Florida State to make it to the Final Four for the first time since that loss to Louisville in the 2013 NCAA basketball championship. So how did they do it? They came out a little bit slow against Montana, were not playing their best basketball, but were able to get it done. This team has tremendous firepower on offense. They've got my boy Moritz Wagner, known as Mo for short, of course. They've got Muhammad Ali Abdul Rahman, who is just a gamer. He can hit threes, he can drive to the hole, he can do it all. They've got shooters. They've got Duncan Robinson, who's a deadeye from deep. They've got Jordan Poole, who hit the crazy buzzer beater against Houston that we'll touch on later. And they're deep. They have players who can come off the bench and make a difference. This team can score, and never was that more evident than in the Texas A&M game in the third round. But they get the job done against Montana, who stayed with them early, but Michigan pulls away late. They actually managed to hold Montana to only 19 points in the second half. And that brings up another good point, that this Michigan team is very good defensively, too. They've got length. especially at the guard and small forward positions. They've got a lot of guys who can cycle through there and are big guys, but who can still handle the ball. Montana was never going to be able to beat this Michigan team if they played even close to their potential, and they played a great deal away from their maximum potential, but they got the job done. So, second round game against a very, 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 very good Houston side who's got that Gray kid. Can't remember his first name. They've got this kid Gray who hit the winner against San Diego State in the first round. Watch the end of that San Diego State game because they had a very good chance to create an all-time March Madness moment, a full court heave that was caught and a shot got put up, which it was basically uncontested and didn't go in. But anyway, got a little bit sidetracked there. So Houston plays Michigan well. Michigan isn't really they're pulling a Montana. They're not really playing close to their potential, and Houston's a much better team than the Grizzlies of Montana were. So that's not going to work. Montana, or I should say Houston, is actually they're up 63-61, and Gray had just hit what seemed to be a game winner. Michigan, one last chance, ball's inbounded to Jordan Poole. Poole puts up a prayer from the sideline, like 4 steps in from half court, and the ball somehow goes in. General calamity ensues. Houston players fall to their knees and lay on the court. Michigan bench players go wild and mob the court. Jordan Poole runs around in celebration. Michigan survives an upset scare from a very good Houston side. And Houston would turn out to be, by a decent margin, the best team that Michigan will have to play if they seek to make it to the national championship game. The next team they played was a very skilled Texas A&M who had very good big men and had just crushed last year's champions North Carolina in their second round game. Were looking like a team that could do some damage in the tourney, but Michigan played maybe their best game of the season against A&M. Everything seemed to be going in. They hit 10-plus three-pointers. Mo Wagner couldn't miss. Rockman couldn't miss. Duncan Robinson got in on the act. It was crazy. Michigan was up by more than 20 at halftime, and like I said before, more than 10 threes. Everything seemed to be falling. Texas A&M did not know what hit them, and they did not play a very good game of basketball. So Michigan advances to the Elite Eight to play Florida State. And if you tuned in expecting to watch another Michigan shooting clinic, this was not what the Florida State game was. This game was atrocious. I watched it from start to end, and it was just not a very fun game of basketball to watch. I mean, there were parts of the game where both teams had gone more than 3 minutes without scoring a bucket. So we hadn't seen a shot go in besides a free throw for good swaths of the game. It was frustrating to watch. Florida State was locked down Michigan. Michigan locked down Florida State. And it seemed like, from my view, Florida State really tired themselves out playing such good defense. They would full court press Michigan. Michigan would struggle just to get the ball to half court, and it seemed like every time they were just throwing up sort of a prayer with like 3 or 4 seconds left on the shot clock. Florida State would then have opportunities to sort of pull away on the offensive end, but they looked lethargic and they would just get locked down. Michigan forced like 3 shot clock violations on Florida State, I should say. Florida State looked like they were expending too much of their energy on the defensive end of the floor and just didn't have enough on the offensive side. Florida State has this enormous person, by the way, who it turns out is 7'4" is 7'4" tall, which I just feel like is something that should be talked about more, because there aren't very many humans that are 7'4". Interesting, at least to me. I don't know, but he he wasn't skilled enough, the 7'4" person, to make a difference on the offensive end. He could alter shots. Michigan was scared going into the lane because that guy's arm basically stretched above the basket, and he could just sort of stand there, and he was like puppy guarding the basket almost, and Michigan was sort of like, how do we get it in there? There's this oak tree standing in front of the basket. But Michigan finds a way to get it done and make it to the Final Four, where they will face Loyola of Chicago. So that's the left side of the bracket, absolute chaos. And Loyola of Chicago and Michigan end up the two teams that will face each other for a national championship berth. The right side of the bracket was equally hectic, but two teams who you would have expected to exit, actually, they were both the number one seeds in Villanova and Kansas, are able to make it through. Firstly, Villanova has looked good all tournament. They take care of the 16 seed Radford, I believe it was. Yes, Radford. They were able to take care of Colin Sexton and Alabama in the second round. They actually absolutely obliterated them through a second half flurry. In the third round, they were able to beat West Virginia, and then they just took care of Texas Tech earlier this Sunday morning to advance to their second Final Four in 3 years. This team has not had to face really any upset. West Virginia was really the best game that they've had to play. Texas Tech gave them a scare here and there, but they were usually up in that 7-10 range the whole time. Jalen Brunson is the man at the helm. They've got DiVincenzo. They've got Mikal Bridges, a future lottery NBA pick, and they shoot the lights out. They like to get the ball inside and kick it out to their three-point shooters, and there's some dead-eyes, marksmen from three. They've been getting it done all tournament, and they were able to get it done on Texas Tech, who is really a lockdown defensive team. They don't really have that huge big man who can back you down and who is a dominating presence on the inside, but they don't need it because they've got long guards on the outside who knock down threes. So Villanova makes it to the Final Four after beating Texas Tech, where they will face Kansas, who, again, were the team expected to come out of their region. Believe me, it has not been easy for Kansas. They've had to escape multiple upset threats. In the first round, they faced the Penn Quakers out of the Ivy League, and Ivy League teams are generally the best 16 seeds that you'll find. Penn shot a lot of threes. That was their game plan, which, if those are going in, do I smell upset? Yes, I do. But Penn was never – they hung with Kansas until like the final 10 minutes of the second half, where nothing was falling for them. They went cold from the field, and Kansas took the game from them. They ended up winning by 16, which sort of it makes it seem like the game was less close than it was. Penn played them pretty well, but Kansas was able to take care of business. In the next round, they faced Seton Hall, and this was their first upset threat because Seton Hall had a very good big man who challenged the Jayhawks all game. They were able to get the job done, however. They've got Devontae Graham, that leadership at the point guard position. They've got whoa! My tongue almost fell out of my mouth after that one. They've got LeGerald Vick, Malik Newman, long guards who can shoot the three ball well. They've got Mihailuk, the Ukrainian. Shout out Ukraine. All my listeners from Ukraine, which I bet is about half a person. Mihailuk, who can shoot the three ball and is sort of a Swiss Army knife, does do it all type of player, another senior leader. In the third round, they played Clemson, got the job done against a very good Clemson side who just absolutely battered Auburn in the previous round. Like it was a crime what they did to Auburn in the game before. Kansas takes care of Clemson, though, after an upset threat, and then faced Duke, a matchup we all wanted to see. You've got Devontae Graham and co. going in against Grayson Allen and those great big men from Duke and Coach K, who always seems to get the job done at the big occasions. This was an incredible game. Duke tried to run that zone defense, and Kansas absolutely tore it apart with dribble penetration, with finding that hole in the middle. Duke couldn't. They basically trusted their two big men to be able to alter any shot on the inside, and so the Kansas guys would get the ball and just sort of be open, and they'd be like, I guess I'll just shoot this, and it worked. Kansas also threw a bunch of lobs to Azubuike. They ran some neat plays sort of down low that freed up Azubuike for some lobs. There were some epic alley-oops in this game. Duke hung with them. And credit to Duke, they were actually ahead for most of this game, and they had a chance to win it in the final seconds after a Mahalik 3 tied it up. Grayson Allen comes down the court, pump fakes about 805 times, and somehow pivots to get an open shot. The ball kisses off the glass, swirls around the bucket, and then kind of stays on the rim for an agonizingly long time for fans of both the Blue Devils and the Jayhawks before rolling out. We are going to overtime. In overtime, it was all Kansas, and it was all Malik Newman. He drained a couple threes, and then Kansas was able to hit their free throws. That's actually been a pet peeve of mine watching March Madness. No one can make their free throws. And that is why I actually enjoyed watching this Kansas-Duke game, because people were actually making their free throws. It looks sort of like an NBA game. And I guess that's what happens when you don't have all these upsets, these two teams who you would expect to be there and who make free throws and stuff like that make it. So Kansas advances. They will face Villanova in their Final Four game for a chance at the national championship. So two very different sides of the bracket. You've got chaos side, Michigan playing Loyola of Chicago, and you've got chaos, but it actually ended how we expected it to side in Kansas and Villanova. Very, very, very exciting. I want to do a little prediction before this podcast ends, and that involves looking into the crystal ball. It is your lucky day. I just took out the crystal ball. According to the Woodruff Report crystal ball, Villanova will play Michigan in the final, and Michigan will win. I'm sorry, this is not my personal opinion. I'm just reading what the crystal ball says. So you'll just have to watch it to see if you can make fun of me for being wrong, make fun of the Woodruff Report crystal ball. But again, the Woodruff Report crystal ball has a pretty good record of being correct. So this has been the Woodruff Report. I'm your host, David Woodruff. Thanks for listening. On this edition, we did a full-scale report of what teams are in the Final Four, how did they get there, who will they play, and all that. Be ready for another podcast coming at you shortly. It's probably going to be more college basketball because it is college basketball season. Keep an eye out. Baseball season is just beginning. Those preseason games are going on. The Giants are playing the A's right now in that fun little cross-bay series that they always do before the season starts. So this has been the Woodruff Report. I'm your host, David Woodruff. Thank you so much for listening. Check out my iTunes and all that, and be sure to listen again next week for the newest and best that's happening in the sports world. Thank you. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Have a great week. Mahalo.